Okay, and welcome to week 13 of the graphics and animation course. And at this point, we are offering some little nuggets of useful information which I suggest you consider using for your final animation and even for some of your other projects if you're still working on them. Now let me preface this by saying that at this point, the kind of information we're bringing along here is for the people who are really trying to get ahead in this field. Because at this point, this is going beyond the basics, and some of you are still working on the basics. And so if you don't feel that you can apply this, don't worry about it. If you do feel that you can apply it, please do, because I think it's going to be a useful thing. And what we're going to talk about for this particular lecture is what's called UV surface textures, because they are important. And let me explain what UV surface textures are for real quick. Well, actually, let's get right into it. UV surface textures are used for making multifaceted objects. And so objects with more than one face, multifaceted. And the reason why that's important is because you can give an object as many surfaces as you want, and sometimes that will solve your problem. But there are times when you have in mind for an object a certain variety of surfaces which you may not be able to program that easily. I'm going to go into a few examples real quick. Okay, so let me describe this. I've described it here as sticky surfaces and cereal boxes. All right, now let me just sort of go back a bit. You have seen in many cases we have applied surfaces to plane objects, to boxes, and to spheres and other things. And sometimes the idea is to wrap the bitmap around the object. For example, it could be applying a tablecloth to a table, and you want to get the edge of the table as well. And sometimes that works easily enough with just doing that. But occasionally you'll get an object that's more complicated. For example, I have this favorite object that I use for this demonstration. And this is an example where every face has a different surface. You see? And so if you were to try to create this, you would have to do it in a number of different ways. You could, hypothetically, give it 6 separate surfaces and apply each of these different things to that. And maybe that would help. But there's actually an easier way of doing it in a more consistent way that you can apply to other similar projects. And that is called UV surfaces. Okay, sticky surfaces and cereal boxes. Essentially, bitmaps can be used as surfaces, as we've already said before. You can wrap a bitmap around a 3D object. And but what if you want the object to have a different surface on each side? So, product box has 6 separate surfaces, like we said here, 6 separate surfaces. And so, you can also, if you have a spherical object, you may think that's easy to work with. But in fact, it may not be, because you want to have, like for example, if you got a map of the world, you want to have the continents in the right places, and you don't want to have a big gap somewhere where the bitmap resets somehow or started to tile. And so that's why you would want a UV surface, even for that. Something like a can is another situation. UV mapping allows for accurate placement of a complete surface. And so that's why we're doing it. Now the workflow, in Modeler, you must indicate that you need a UV surface. And so that means that while you're in Modeler, you have to set up the surface, even if it doesn't appear to do anything. And so that's why it's a little bit confusing. It was not made easy to understand, but we will go over it. Sometimes simply saying you want a spherical surface is all you have to do. Believe it or not, that one's easy. Now, something like a multifaceted box like this takes a little bit more work, but it's not necessarily as hard as it looks, and it can be a little fun. Now, why are we doing this? Well, photorealistic objects are always a wonderful goal. The more accurate you can make an object, the better. Making objects more realistic is always helpful, and anything to do with product demos and illustrations is critical, meaning that if your client wants their product displayed as it would be seen in a store, then your product box had better be accurate. And so if you need that box to show up in multiple places and you got a nice 3D model of it, that really helps. And so that could be critical in whatever it is you're doing. And of course, why not? It's just one other thing that you can add to your arsenal of understood things. Okay, so here we find ourselves in Modeler. And the first thing that I wanted to demonstrate relatively quickly is how you could make a planet. Now, a planet is kind of a sphere, but it's got a map. Now, if you've ever seen old maps of the world, they usually have that ovular shape to them only because they're trying to stretch out onto a sphere. And of course, if you want to make a globe, it's nice to be able to think in terms of latitude and longitude. But of course, if you just got a paper maps are only so accurate because they don't take into account curvature. So to start by making a planet, all we're going to do is to create a ball. We're going to have a ball. Okay, so create a ball. And this time, this is kind of a ball. Let's see how it looks. Almost there. So if I go into my numeric pad by hitting the N, you'll see that I can give it a radius, and so I'm going to give it a radius of 4. And I'm just going to go through all of these things and do that. So if I give it a radius of 4, then what I have created is a perfect sphere. Now there's one little problem with this that some of you may be aware of and some of you may not be aware of. It's a dirty little secret. The Earth is not a perfect sphere. Never was. The Earth always has a little bit of a dip to it. So if you take the poles and you sort of crush them down a little bit, that's closer to what the Earth looks like because the Earth spins. And so the area where the most mass is comes out a little bit. And so the Earth gets a little flatter once you get to the top and a little wider once you get to the equator. And so we'll just say that that's close enough. It doesn't have to be perfect for our purposes. But believe it or not, we've just done all our modeling. This is all the modeling you have to do for a planet. It's a sphere. Now, if you want to give it a separate atmosphere, you can do that. There's all kinds of nutty things you can do. But let's just start with this. Now, the other thing that we want to do is we want to go down and give it a UV understood surface. And so that's what we haven't done yet. Now, that is way down here in the bottom under T for texture. It's a UV texture. So I'm going to click the T, and then I'm going to go here, and I'm going to say New. And so literally this is all I'm doing. And I'm going to call this texture Planet. Planet. And I'm going to decide that its initial value will be spherical. So I'm going to map a spherical UV called Planet. And that is literally all I have to do except say create. I'm not going to do anything else. And you'll notice down here it says new map planet created. And you're done. And so then we just close that out and we save this object. And I'm going to call this planet. Or planet underscore model, so we know this is a model. And so there you go. So then we're going to walk on over to layout, which again has actually layout is perfect for space because it has no predefined limits. And so if we load that object, planet model, we get planet model. And so there is literally nothing else to do with that either. So now the question is, how do we actually map the planet onto the model? So the first thing we do is we find a nice little wraparound picture. And so I already happen to have a series of pictures here. And so some of these are pictures of the Earth. So let me look at one of these for you. So if I double click on this one, we can see this is a picture of the Earth, which obviously includes kind of like a tiling point. Because obviously this has to wrap around the sphere in order to work. And you can see that some of these areas are distorted. For example, this would be Antarctica, and it wouldn't crawl all the way across the page like that. And so this is what we want to map onto a sphere. So what we're going to do is we're going to go here, and we're going to go to our surface editor. And I haven't even given it a specific surface except the default, which is good enough for what we're doing. Then we're going to go within there to the color area, just hit the T for texture, and we get the same type of options we had before. But in this case, instead of choosing spherical, I'm going to go all the way down to UV, because there is a UV surface. Now when I do that, I suddenly am asked for a UV map. There's only one available. It's called Planet. It came with the object. And so right now, nothing has happened except when we put the image on there, we're going to load the image. And here we are. We have a bunch of images. I'm just going to grab Earth, and I'm going to dump Earth on there. And there it is. Now, of course, once I say use texture, if I were to then turn on smoothing, it looks a little better. If I want to make this a light up globe, I could give it some illumination. And now here's the important part. If I'm going to get in on this a little bit, we don't have to do a camera view. And then let's say I take my planet model and I modify it by rotating it. You can see that if I go all the way around the world, you can see that the realism holds up. And if I were to go to the equators, you can see that, the poles, you can see there's Antarctica, and maybe a little bit of a problem here, but overall, the image holds up. And so we have a planet. So, as you can see, once you've done that, let's say we load a different image. And so there's a second Earth, and which would give you this effect, which kind of fuzzy. I don't really like that one. So I'm going to load another image. And so how about Jupiter? If I load Jupiter, actually Jupiter looked better last time I tried it. So let's see what happens if I were to change that to VPR. Still a little fuzzy, but okay. Let's try another one. If I load Mars, then you get Mars. And so all of these planets, we can switch back to the original Earth, all of these planets give you that same effect. And so all you need is a sphere. So what does that mean for this? That means that if you want to have like a space scene, you've got the basis for it right here. You've got planets all over the place. You can create the entire solar system, or you can make up your own solar system if you want. And so that's basically how you would do that. Okay, so here we are back in Modeler. And so now we're going to transition from what was a simple UV to something that may take a little bit of doing. Okay, so I'm going to make a new object. So clear the board. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a box. And so I'm going to make the box kind of resemble this. So if you're looking at it from the front, like that, then that's what we're going to see here. And the top will be more narrow. And the edge, so it may look a little bit like that. And believe it or not, it doesn't even have to be perfect. So now suddenly we have done most of our modeling, and we can actually adjust this later on without losing anything. So I'm just going to go ahead and save this object, and I'm just going to call this box. I don't feel like spilling spaghetti right now. And so that is our box, and it has virtually no geometry, and right now we'll leave it that way. So I'm going to turn off box, and there's one thing that we have to do. We have to unweld everything. And let me explain what that means. In order to create a UV surface, we have to basically build a map. And so that means we have to break this object into its geometric shapes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into polygon mode, and I'm just going to select the entire thing, and I'm just going to go into the detail tab, which I don't know if we've used this yet, and just hit unweld. Now when we do that, let me show you what happens. If we unselect this, if we were to go down here and select just this top polygon and go to Modify Move, see what happens? If we look at it up here, we can see that we're literally pulling the object apart, which normally you wouldn't be able to do. So I'm going to undo that. So now what we've got is an object that is haphazardly held together just by the fact that those planes happen to be in their position. I will re-weld it later. But for the moment, we're just going to start with this. And so then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to this upper window here. And I'm just going to go to where it says top. I'm going to go all the way down to the bottom and it says UV texture. And then I get this. It's a window we've never seen before. And so I'm going to zoom in on this. And this is not easy to use necessarily, but it does the job. Everything to do with your UV surface has to be on that pad. And so basically what we have to do is to build a UV map. So to start with, I'm going to take the top part of the box by selecting a polygon, and I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and I'm going to select the bottom part of the box also. I'm going to go down here, make a new, I'm going to call this box UV, and I'm going to try to give it its initial value. Now at this point I'm not going to guess, I'm just going to play around with it. I have a choice between these three axes. Let's see what happens if I create it on the y-axis. If I do that, and then I back up, I go to Modify Size. I'm not sure that's right. So I'm going to go over to X and try again. X does work. And so I don't really understand why we have to do it this way, but this will allow you to pick whichever UV angle works. And so once we know the one that works, I'm just going to move these, and then I'm going to deselect one of them, which happened to be the right one. So I can keep moving these. And so now I have the top and bottom of the box within the UV map. And undo that because I don't want to move it there. And so now that I've done that, that's 2 of the 6 sides. What happens if I then grab this one and this one? So I've got the left and right. And so I know that the X is not the correct axis. Let's try the Y this time. If I create that, you'll notice that lo and behold, there they are. And so here, I have to do more than just move those things. I have to go in and rotate them so that I can get them to fit in the right space. And so I'm going to rotate them to 90 degrees and move them accordingly. And I want to put those together. Now, believe it or not, even though it is awfully convenient if they're the same size, it's not 100% necessary. But in this case, we will want to get at least these ones very close. Maybe just a little bit more, size them up just a little bit more. And if we have to, we can make everything smaller if it just doesn't fit. And so then if I deselect one of these, I can move this one along the side, and that just fits. In fact, I can even move that just a little bit so it's a little bit less ambiguous. And so now, if you look at the box, we have the front and back surfaces, and all we really are missing is the edges. So if I grab the edge there, and then I go and hold the Shift key, and I grab the edge here, and I create it on the Z-axis, those are my edges. and the edges don't look right to me. So I'm going to, actually just for the heck of it, I wonder if I were to change that, if that would look any better. And try that one. Definitely not there. I'm going to say that this is closer, but they both got the same problem. So I'm just going to stretch them a little bit to the shape that I think they should be, because we know what it's supposed to look like. As long as we can get these to match, it should work. And one more time. Okay, so then as you see, we've got, I'd say that's about right. I'm going to move that into position. You'll see why we're doing this in a minute. And make sure it's within the pad. And I'm going to lose one of them. I'm just going to move that other one right in next to it. So you see, we have the sides. And they're not perfect, but they're good enough. Okay, so now that I've done that, this becomes our UV map. This is basically what you did with a sphere. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to close this because we're done with it. And then we're going to take this window here and we're going to hit the little up triangle so that we're going to look at only this. Then we're going to zoom in on it, get it as big on the screen as we can. And this is where we're going to do something that some of you may never have done before. If you look on your keyboard, somewhere there is a button that says PRTSCR, which stands for Print Screen. So I'm going to hit the Print Screen button, which many years ago might have caused the printer to do something, but now it basically just takes whatever's on the screen and puts it into the clipboard. Then we're going to go into Photoshop. Okay, so in our welcome screen here in Photoshop, we're going to create a new image. And we're just going to say create. And what that image will do is it will mirror the desktop. Now in this case, the desktop looks kind of weird because I'm actually using two screens, but it still will work for what we're doing. So if you just hit Control V or Edit Paste, what it will do is it will take everything that was currently on that desktop at the time and put it onto that scratch pad. So we get this long desktop. Now the only part that we need is there. So I'm going to magnify in on that a little bit so it's easy to see. And then I'm going to go to the Marquee tool. Now all the Marquee tool is used for is for cutting out things. I'm just going to draw a box just to accommodate this area, this UV area. And make sure it's just right, because if it's off by a little bit, it may cause issues. And then I'm going to crop it. So if I go to Image, Crop, now we're down to the UV image. So I'm just going to expand it a little bit so we get a nice good look at it. And so now this is no longer has anything to do with Lightwave. This is now a bitmap image. And the image quality doesn't matter at all either. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in the image with actual pictures. So if I'm in the area where I have my my image file, I'm going to go into the spaghetti box folder, and these are previously made scans of that image. So I have the two front pieces. Now in this case it's kind of interesting because the front pieces are actually facing the wrong way, but we'll get this right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this front piece because it happens to be straight up and down. Obviously, I've had this problem before. So if I open that up, I get this. So we have spaghetti. And so I'm going to select all. So I got the entire image. At this point, I could maybe fine-tune it a bit, but I'm not going to do that. And I'm going to copy it. Then I'm going to go over here to my untitled image, and I'm going to paste this. Now notice it's way too big, which is actually good because we want to reduce the image rather than expand it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit scale. I'm going to scale it down. So I just grab this and begin scaling it down. So each time I do that, we see more of the image. So this was scanned at very high resolution, maybe higher than necessary. So you see if we go out here, we notice that the image is a little bit longer than it's supposed to be, and that could be because maybe we didn't have a long enough box in the first place, but guess what? It doesn't matter. We can still do this. And so, if I edit transform and I scale it, if I were to scale it this way, I think I've got to hold on the shift key these days. If I hold down the shift key, I'm going to literally distort the image to fit that space. And then I hit enter. And it will re-stretch when we take it back into layout. So what's happened is I got the proportions a little bit wrong, but it's not the end of the world. So then we're going to open up the back, which is here. Select all, copy, and paste. Same thing. Just get it small enough that it will fit into that space. And at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and hold the shift key and line it up. And so there is the back of the box. And if I go ahead and open up side A, select all, copy, and if I go here and edit paste, and I scale it down, and I'm just going to hold the shift key, and I can fit it there and there. And one more of those long ones. So that was side A, this would be side B. Select all, copy, go back to this one, paste, and transform, edit transform. And if I hold down the Shift key, I can then find position this, and that should do it. Okay, and lastly, the last two, and that would be the edges. I'll take this one, and I think those edges are the same. And I'll just hold on the Shift key. And there we are. And let's see if there's another edge. Take edge B. Copy. And this will be the last one. And if we paste, and so we get that down to size, and we will, at least for the temporary, I'm going to call that OK, and transform again. So I'm going to rotate it. So I think that's right. And one more, transform scale, and just hold on the Shift key and line that up. And enter. And that gives you the entire UV map. So what we're going to do, and now notice if you look over here, those are all the layers. Each layer has a component of the UV map, and that's what we're gonna save this as an unprocessed image. So I'm going to take it into here. So I'm just going to save it as a Photoshop file, and I'm going to call that spaghetti_box, and we'll start with that. And then we're going to save a copy of it. The copy will have no layers in it, and you'll know why we do this in a second. So if I save it as a JPEG, I'm going to put it with the, let's call it spaghetti box, and so spaghetti box, we'll say 1. And we can, doesn't really matter where we put the compression, we got our spaghetti box. So then, if we go into layout, well, first of all, let's go back to Modeler. And so Modeler, you see we have all this stuff. We're going to put that back into scale. And we don't have to do this right now, but we will eventually merge the points. But before we do that, let's just go ahead and save this object and then take it into layout. So in layout, I'm going to go back to texture view, close all these for a minute, and I'm just going to go into items and just clear all objects. And then we'll just load the box. If we load the box, there's the box. And so then what we're going to do is we're going to go to the box and put in that UV surface. So if we go to Surface Editor, we can see there's only the default surface. We go into the T tab just like we did for the globe. Here, instead of an image map, it will be an image map, but instead of the projection, we're going to take it down to UV. And the UV map, there's only one available, which is going to be box. Now the image, we have to load the image, and Spaghetti Box 1 is right there. And if I put that in, lo and behold, it appears to be working. Now when I say it appears to be working, it's because it may not be perfect yet. So I'm going to inspect it. So the way I'm going to do that is turn the luminosity up a little bit. And then I'm going to rotate the whole works. So if I rotate this box, let's see, I rotate it. Let's see if I can rotate it this way. I notice that the other side of the box is upside down. Now let's say for a minute that that was unacceptable to me. How would I fix it? Well, what I would do is I would go back into Photoshop where we still have all the layers, and I find the layer that I want to work on. That would be this one. And I go to Edit, Transform, Rotate, and this time I'm just going to turn that thing around like that. So it rotates 180 degrees. See if I can get it perfect. I'm just going to eyeball it. That's probably good enough. And so I do that, and then I move it just a little bit, just make sure. And so now our UV map has been adjusted. So I save as, go back to JPEG again, and this will be Spaghetti Box 2. If I save that, I go back here, and I go back to my surface editor, and I go back to there. All I'm going to do is change the image. So I'm going to load image, take Spaghetti Box 2, and nothing appears to have happened until I look over here. I turn this around, now the spaghetti box is correct. And so there, I can look at all of the sides, and I'm going to say that this is fine. So now, the last thing we need to do is go over to here, because we still have that basic problem with the box. If we were to grab one of these edges and move it, we would rip that off the box and create an empty dimension. So we're not going to do that. What we are going to do is we're going to grab everything and go back into detail, and we're going to say merge points and do it automatically. And it says 16 points were eliminated. And so therefore, if we go and grab this piece again and try to move it, what will happen is it will take everything with it. And so now the object is once again an object. And we just save the object. And if you look here, everything is fine. So there we have a UV creation. Now, do you have to do this? Not necessarily, but it can be a very useful skill to have.